Okay, everyone. Welcome tonight to our Medicine Buddha practice. If you're new, please introduce yourself in the chat. Um, and always, when you're ready, go ahead and start adding prayer requests as well to the chat. Any questions? Please post and ask a question. That would be wonderful. Thank you all for being here. Happy New Year. I hope that the new year is going well so far. But we're only 2 days into it, 3 days. Today's the 3rd. Yeah. So, if you're new to our practice, this is a guided practice, and we give a talk, then we'll do practice, and it's a guided practice, working with visualization. We're doing a little bit of breath work as well, and this is all coming out of really the spirit of the Medicine Buddha tradition, Medicine Buddha Tantric tradition, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So welcome, everyone. Prayer request if you're new, or just anything that you're wanting to offer prayers for yourself, for the world, for loved ones, and so forth. Please do so as well. What else? So, as we're getting started, I had a chance to watch the new Matrix movie, and I really liked it. I actually really liked it. I was talking about this last week. I really liked it because it really actually tied into so many of the things that we've been exploring this past week with practice. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there was something so fascinating around the theme of how the Matrix co-opts and assimilates any idea of freedom. So this is what we've been talking about in terms of samsara, like this experience of delusion that we're moving through, which I call the carceral state. This is what I'm calling it in my new work, my new writing, the carceral state. That once you get excited about getting free, then the Matrix is like, it pushes you into the cycle, into like this different program that keeps you like actually making the same choices, that perpetuates the delusion, but your thinking is actually trying to get you free. And that's really, I found it to be a really interesting, very meta, this kind of like, let's take, basically the movie was about itself, right? Basically, and I really like that folding in, because this is really how it works when we're attempting to practice, right? And we're trying to cultivate this experience of realization, right? And that realization comes with the development of compassion and wisdom, or care and clarity, right? These two energies, these two streams are brought together, and when it's brought together, it creates this force, right? That actually begins to push against and push through, actually, the experience of delusion. Delusion can't survive against deep care and clarity, right? Because the care helps us to start actually thinking about the experiences of other and the experiences of the collective, and the wisdom or the clarity actually helps us to figure out what's actually happening, right? So it's not this individual self-indulgent experience, it becomes this collective carrying experience that samsara, the carceral state, can't support. And I love seeing those themes running throughout the movie. I mean, that was one thing, right? You know, but last week we talked about what it means to make a a really strong, solid aspiration to get free from this experience of delusion, of samsara, the carceral state, and what it takes and what it means to do that, and how strong that aspiration has to be, right? You know, and how complete and intense and fierce the aspiration has to be, where we're basically saying, under any means necessary, I'm going to have to get free. I need to get free. You know, I don't have a choice anymore. You know, and what that means for us to make that choice. The things that you'll lose, the things that you'll give up, the choices that you start making, right? Like, are we ready for that kind of offering? I call it an offering, not sacrifices necessarily, but offering. What are we willing to offer, you know, to get free? So that's one thing. That's one reflection from the movie. Yeah, the carceral state, carceral imprisonment, state imprisonment. So yeah, the carceral state. So I define samsara as the carceral state, as a state of being bound, trapped, you know. And so so there's another thing about the movie. So to get free from the carceral state or the matrix, so I have like a whole list of words I'm using to describe one experience, which is delusion. To get free from this state, you have to become a fugitive. You have to enter into fugitivity, right? And fugitivity is everything that the state doesn't want you to do. It's actually everything the state is keeping you from doing, right? So that's another big piece of this, right, that I'm writing about right now. Like, what does it mean to become fugitive, right? What does it mean for all, well, not all of us, I would say some of us, but definitely me. What does it mean to go against all the ways in which I was taught how to be a good boy, right? And to like actually just like push that aside and say, you know what, I'm actually going to center liberation instead of accommodating you. So this is what we're actually doing in the carceral state. Like, you know, you're becoming a fugitivity by saying, you know what, I'm actually not going to abide by the boundaries of the state, because the carceral state is only created to repress me. So when we become fugitives, or when we enter into fugitivity, right, we actually start becoming countercultural, right? You know, and what that also means is that we set ourselves up. We talked about this last week. We set ourselves up for retaliation by the system. You know, the system will retaliate. You know, because that's what happens in fugitivity. If you look at abolitionism, right? You know, early abolitionism here in America, you know, like there were consequences, right? You know, there were consequences for trying to escape slavery, but there's also consequences for supporting freedom, you know. There were consequences for trying to tell the truth of what was actually happening in the world. Like these were consequences. I think about Ida B. Wells, for instance, and Ida B. Wells was a black woman journalist who recorded. She's actually the reason why we have a lot of records of lynching, particularly in the South, because you know she would gather data and write it up and publish it, and she, you know, was escaping death left, you know, death threats and like mobs and left and right. And I hope one day we have a movie about Ida B. Wells. But that kind of fugitivity, you're going to tell the truth. You're going to do what you need to do to get free, right? You know, in freedom work, in liberation work, we figure out what our job is. You know, what is it that we're doing? You know, everyone, we all can't be Harriet Tubman, for instance. Like, that's not what some of our work is. But some of us, you know, maybe we're not on the front lines of work, of liberation work, but we're doing other things like education, or we're caretaking, you know, or we're supporting communities, whatever it may be, right? So this kind of fugitivity is dangerous, right? You know, of course, it's dangerous. You're doing something that the system itself doesn't want you to do, you know. And this is, you know, this is why I think, for me, The Matrix is one of the most like brilliant, skillful articulations of this kind of philosophy. I'm not saying The Matrix is necessarily Buddhist, because I think there are other philosophies running through it, but it's, for me, it works really well to talk about these really like esoteric concepts. You know, as I said, you know, 20 years ago when I first saw the first Matrix, I was completely confused. I had to watch it twice. You know, I was like, I have no idea. Like, after the first viewing, I was like, what is this movie about? You know, and then I watched it again and it just hit me. I was like, oh, this is like about getting free. You know, of course you get free in the Matrix and you end up in the real world, which isn't as exciting, but the overall idea is that like you get free, you bust out of this, right? And how do you bust out of it? So you go into this expression of fugitivity. What do you do to get out of it? And I think in The Matrix, you know, in this current movie, I found a couple of different things that lined up really strongly with tantric practice, you know, in a way that was like, oh, that's how we can talk about this. So I don't want to actually ruin it for people who may still want to see the movie or haven't seen the movie or the franchise anyway, or anything. But two really powerful things here that I wanted to point out, which I want all this stuff to come back into our practice when we start practicing. So I think this is all very relevant. But these two ways of breaking out of the matrix or the carceral state that was actually expressed in the movie was first with, you know, sorry for those of you who haven't seen the movie. I'm not going to ruin the plot or anything, but I'm going to just mention some specific scenes. So the scene with Bugs, you know. And by the way, like what Lana Wachowski was doing, I think it was a lot of, I just felt in many ways like she was really trying to help us understand, what was she doing? It was very queer. I guess I want to say the movie was super, super queer. But I think Matrix has always been queer. You know, I think queerness is so often about this kind of fugitivity, actually. I think queerness has been about how do we get free to express our most authentic self, right? Knowing that there's always going to be consequences as long as we all live within the carceral state. Like, how do you get free and happy and still be yourself, right? I think there's a lot of those themes running through the Matrix. A lot of like, what does it mean to transform, to transition? What does it mean to change? There's a lot of that in the whole franchise. What does it mean to change? But those are other themes. But I'm going to get back to these 2 points here. So this idea of breaking free from the Matrix with Bugs in this scene, and Bugs is like one of like the main characters, you know, in it. You know, one of the good people, like one of the parts. New Zion doesn't exist anymore. Sorry, I ruined that for you. So the New Human City, they come from the New Human City, but so the point in the movie where Bugs sees Neo looks at them, and they begin to wake up, Bugs begins to wake up, and that scene really deeply exemplified the ways in which transmissions happens between a master and a student, like that kind of transference of realization. And that transference of realization is really the ways in which the teacher, the master, actually embodies awakening in a moment. And the ways in which we're invited into that awakening, even if it's just for a second, even a half a second. It doesn't have to be long, right? Because it's the same experience of gaining a glimpse of the nature of our minds. It's only a second, right? And after that experience, Bugs was like, I wasn't the same anymore. Like, I knew that this was all just an illusion. Like, that's the experience of a master, between a master and a student. That's what the master is always showing is, well, the master is embodying the emptiness of everything. And we open to it, we get that glimpse of emptiness, and you get a glimpse of how things really are. You will always be changed. You enter automatically into fugitivity. Because there's no way that you can go back. Now, granted, we saw in the first franchise the character who got free and then decided to go back, right, into the Matrix, right? But with this, but we're talking about the transference of realization between two people, right? And that's something that's really personal, it's deep, it's transformative. You can't articulate it. You can't articulate it. And this is one of the reasons why the teacher in tantric traditions is incredibly important. The teacher is a mirror, right? The teacher reflects back to us the nature of things, but this has to be a realized teacher, of course, to do that. And what we were seeing over and over and over again, what we see often, I would say, in a lot of communities are teachers who actually can't actually embody that emptiness, but they pretend, they kind of perform that emptiness. So there's no realization actually behind much of what they're doing. And so people aren't getting awakened, they're actually just getting deeper. It's in samsara. Again, that's another way samsara, or the carceral state, works to trap people, because there are people who buy into the illusion of freedom in this experience and then think they're teaching liberation, but they're actually agents for the system, right? Because they are just perpetuating, performing something that the system has given them, convincing them, that this is freedom, this is what freedom looks like. I see that also with a lot of cults, where there's some charismatic, realized person that arises with some realization, and they start taking on communities and students, but their realization isn't actually complete. It is actually like a fragment of what it needs to be. They may have gotten a good idea, and thinking that idea is like the key, but when in fact it's just actually training people to buy deeper into the illusion, or into the delusion of everything. So this is why this is so tricky as well, because it's like, how do you know if something that's it's actually being taught? Well, let me just back that up. How do you know what is being taught is actually liberatory? What are the characteristics, what are the signs of a person who's teaching this and of the teachings themselves? What does it show you? Um, you know, um, so I mean, I'm not necessarily going to answer that right now. Sorry, I'm just thinking about my own experiences with this, but this is something that I want you to think about. As we begin, it's like, what do you think? Like, what do you think is, the characteristics of a realized teacher? What are the characteristics of real Dharma? When I say Dharma, I don't mean Buddhism. Like Dharma, just like real wisdom teachings, right? Like, what are the real teachings? What are the characteristics of all of that? And so this other part of the other example of like how do we get free that was kind of offered in the movie was, I guess, Morpheus. When Morpheus started seeing code, and he was like, "What is this?" And that was really, really profound as well, because for me, that is so much of that's so much of my experience of deity practices. Like Medicine Buddha, these tantric practices are actually showing us the code of how the carceral state is assembled, and is actually teaching us to decode, this whole pattern. It's teaching us to break through the pattern. Like we perpetuate the system by unconsciously repeating patterns over and over and over again. This is language from the movie, actually, which I thought was like profound. It was so brilliant, that the matrix was defined as just doing a series of patterns over and over again and not thinking about it. That's the same with the carceral state. It's like, oh, we just do these things over and over and over and over again. We don't think about it. But when we come into deity practices are about awakening the capacity of our minds, right? And the capacity of our minds that's creating, and learning how to develop agency over what's being created, so we can disrupt the ways in which we're just habitually running through things, and going through these patterns. And I just, again, like, I just think that kind of work is so nuanced and subtle and profound. And this is what we've been doing, for, we're going on 2 years now. It'll be 2 years in March and April, right? And in spring. That we're training our minds, we're trying to understand the capacity of our minds to create, and we're learning to develop agency over that process of creation, so we can stop creating what's basically creating our incarceration. I know I see there are other questions too, the ask the question box as well. So this idea of the teacher, how do you find a good teacher? It's like, well, this is the risk. Like, literally everything that I'm saying right now is stuff that I'm already writing about in the new book. But I mean, this question, how do you find an authentic teacher? First of all, let me say there are many, many authentic teachers in the world. I happen to be friends with a lot of them. And I think that's wonderful. But the issue here is like, what do you need? Right? What exactly do you need from a teacher? That's the question. That's the question that's actually helped me and guided me to finding teachers to work with. It's like, what do I need? And being very clear about what I need, because there are teachers who are really good at certain things. And we have to be careful that we're aligning our needs with their capacities. So often, and this is my advice as a student, right, is that I have to get clear about what I need. I've had to get clear about what I need, before I even approach a teacher. Like, what is it that I need? What am I looking for? Because many of you say you want a teacher, but like, what does that actually mean? People come to me all the time, will you be my teacher? What do you mean? Because sometimes it means you want a father, you want a best friend, you want a partner, you want someone to hang with, right? And I don't do any of that, right? I'm not saying that your teacher shouldn't be your friend. I just don't think that's the primary relationship status that you should start with. I don't. I study with teachers to get free, and then anything else that happens in terms of friendship or something platonic is wonderful. But first and foremost, and I keep saying this word, I know people get a little bothered by it, but it's a business. It's business. My business is getting the hell out of here and trying to bring as many people with me as possible. That's my business. My business is getting people free. Now, I'm not saying I'm Neo. But like, quite frankly, Keanu Reeves is like real attractive. Like, ever since Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, I've had such a huge crush on Keanu Reeves. Anyway, enough of that. Morpheus. And what was I saying? I got distracted. I started talking about boys. To get free, getting clear about when I come into a relationship with a teacher, like, what do I need? And actually stating that really clearly. Beyond that, it's never going to be perfect. You will never be in a teacher relationship that's going to be perfect. There's always going to be complexities. There's always going to be shit happening, because you're in a relationship with a human, a realized human, hopefully, but still a human. You have to negotiate the particularities of humanity arising with strong realization. Right, and that's something that takes years to understand. Actually, this is exactly what I'm writing about. That's why I've been writing about this today, is how do we relate to intense humanity arising alongside of profound realization. I would say even enlightenment sometimes. I think that the work that some of you are going to have to do, you're going to have to actually let your hearts break around this romanticizing of a teacher-student relationship. Because quite honestly, in this tradition, in Vajrayana Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, like, you read the text and it's just like a little overwhelming. Really, it's just like you read, these old texts by these great, like, medieval saints and you realize masters, and you're just like, I'll never have a teacher like that. You know, um, we have to disrupt those narratives. You know, like that's like you have to move beyond this perfection of a teacher, because you'll never actually get to the real work of being in the care of a being um, who just wants you to get free, right? You have to get clear about how you want to interact with the teacher. You have to get clear about like all of this, you know. Um, if a teacher doesn't disappoint you, then there's something wrong. There's something that's off, right? You know, if I haven't disappointed you multiple times by now, then there's something wrong. Um, because I do not center pleasing people at all. Like that's not like my goal. My goal is to help people get free, help people to deepen their practice. That has nothing to do with like fulfilling your expectations of me, because that becomes a trap, you know. Um, there's a way that I've seen teachers super accommodate the expectations of their students in such a way that they lose a sense of integrity. They lose a sense of what they're doing because they get a little busy trying to make everyone comfortable, and they do that because they rely on students for their well-being, right? For their material well-being, for their care, right? And of course, why would you piss off someone who's caring for you, right? Um, there's a dilemma there, you know. You have to be with a teacher who's just going to tell you the truth, and they don't give a shit about it if you walk out. Like those have been the teachers the teachers that I've studied closely with, my Tibetan teachers, including, you know, my Vedic teacher. Um, they've just been like, listen, Rod, this is what you need to do, and I don't give a shit if you get pissed off or not. That's this how it is. You know, and I have gotten pissed off, right? Yeah. But they're seeing something that you need to address, and they're not interested in you being their friend or you liking them. They're interested in you doing work to get free. Um, I heard if you see your teacher as the Buddha, he is the Buddha. Not sure what that means. Of course you can be a Buddha. Buddha was still a human though. You know, the Buddha, Shakyamuni, was still this guy, this dude, right? Who was still human, who still made mistakes, you know? Of course, one of his big mistakes was still believing that women had no capacity for spiritual realization. You know, that's what I mean. You know, women had to organize in the early Sangha to get access to the teachings. You know, so why would people have to do that with a master who's supposedly realized and awakened? Because they're still a human, right? Um, yeah. Um, I've had the incredible fortune of spending a lot of time studying, living with enlightened, um, well, one enlightened master in particular, my root teacher, um, that a lot of people don't get. And yeah, it was very complex. There was a lot of shit going on. You know, we had to write a whole chapter about it in Lama Rod. You know, I'm writing another chapter about it as well in my new book. But what I learned about what enlightenment was and what realization is, like cutting through all of this romanticizing and intense language about being awakened, like just getting through that and saying that like it's just still really complex, right? You can have an experience of emptiness, but you're still living in the relative, right? And one's realization, one's enlightenment, when one achieves enlightenment in the human body, in a life, it doesn't mean they become like Neo, since we're on the subject of nature. It's not like Neo. They don't become superheroes. They have this they get the illusion, right? They understand the illusion of the whole state. They understand the illusion. They have experienced the illusion of both the state and the sense of the ego. And the ego is what binds the state together, right? So they have an experience of that, so they see that. And that frees them, right, from a lot of suffering. One would argue all suffering, but I don't know about that in particular. But it frees you from a lot of suffering. But you're still in the body, right? And so when different people achieve different awakenings, they can manifest very different abilities, and so I'm sure that was part of a longer train of thought, but I don't know why I mentioned that. Oh yeah, this whole superhuman thing. Yeah, like that awakening, that realization isn't about the display of these superhuman characteristics, or what we would call cities, right? It's not about these abilities. It's actually about the experience of actually having the experience of the illusion. Like you have experienced the illusion, therefore you're freed from the illusion itself, but you're still in this world, right? And if you are a bodhisattva, or if you're dedicated to the liberation of all beings, then you're making a commitment to stay in relationship with people. To stay in a relationship with people, you actually probably need to like embrace a little bit of humanity. Like this is how we communicate. We communicate through our humanness, right? And I think the most profound realized teachers are those teachers who are extremely human. Not the violence part of the humanity, but these beings who are completely themselves. Like who have these personalities, who have these ways of just being in the world. You look at them and you're like, oh my God, And a lot of stories that we have of these teachers, yeah, there's also been a shadow to that. There's been abuse, there's been violence, but that's not part of the situation. That's not this naturally arising part of being really human. That's just a part that comes out, because there is still shadow work that realization that we have to commit to, You may awaken from the illusion, but you're still participating in certain kinds of illusion. This is the risk here, right? Because to embrace your humanity in order to teach, to be in a relationship with people, there's a shadow part of the humanity that's also a part of that, and you have to be really resourced and supported to manage that. Because part of that realization is actually saying, oh, I've achieved I've achieved realization, and if I do this thing that may be harmful, then it doesn't matter, right? And we can convince ourselves that doing these things are actually skillful, but when in fact they're self-serving. And it's self-serving still because there's still a part of the humanity that they can't let go of. They can't let go of this. If they let go of this, they won't be here for us, right? And when people let go, when people achieve enlightenment and they let go of that humanity, you're not communicating anymore, There's no way of communicating. Um, you know, but I think also too, we're also complicit in this as well. As a student, I have had to work really hard not to pressure or push my teachers into ways of being that fulfill some expectation of being awakened or superhuman. Like we all have this like need for our teachers to be like bigger than life, to to have all these qualities and these abilities and everything. And I had to disrupt that, because that's really glamorous and sexy and fun, but it's not so much fun, to be with this teacher who just seems really ordinary. Who wants an ordinary teacher? But finding those ordinary teachers, that's even harder, right? Because you have to be attuned to this. Well, it's not always subtle, but you have to be attuned to something. Like you have to be attuned to the ways in which they're radiating this kind of awakening. That's not buzzy, that's not glamorous, that's not Instagram worthy. Like it's a very subtle, nuanced expression that you can tune into, that you can feel. This is why I keep saying, well, maybe I haven't said it a lot in these spaces, but I keep saying often that there are realized beings everywhere. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration, but I think there are more realized beings than we realize, living on our blocks, shopping at the grocery store, or whatever it may be, who aren't like just broadcasting the realization. In many cases, they don't even know that they're this awakened, because it's so ordinary, and that's where you want to be. Like it's so ordinary and normal to have this perspective that you don't even think you're different. You don't even think you're special. Right? I think sometimes it's the teachers who buy into their own specialness, that those are the teachers you have to avoid. Right? I see people posting Deepa May, Trungpa. Even though those, Chris Deepa May, Trungpa are like night and day there, but the path of devotion isn't for everyone either. I want it to be for everyone, but it's not. It's really not. Like you can't go to sleep when you're in Tantra, because that's when the harm really happens. Like you can't follow. You have to stay awakened, because there's so much happening, because you're being introduced to the enormity of data. Just like the Matrix, like this is enormity of data that's so overwhelming that we begin to shut it out. And then when we shut that data out, we just start creating these lives. And we say, well, this is who I am, this is what I do, right? But that's just a reaction to being overwhelmed by all the information. And what a teacher is doing is pulling us into that stream of data. And we're having to actually like negotiate and be in a relationship to everything that's coming at us, right? And we're using that enormity of data to experience disruption, to get disrupted, to get jolted, and we can use that data to actually start liberation work. I mean, the level of the devotion, again, what kind of teacher do you want? Right? A mindfulness teacher is different than a tantric teacher. A Theravadan teacher is different than a Zen teacher. Well, Theravada and Zen maybe a little closer, a little more similar, but like when you choose a tantric teacher, you are basically choosing risk, right? It's just risk, you know. But there is such a potential in taking that risk, right? And that's what leads us into. I wanted at the beginning of my practice, right? I was like, there's got to be something different than this bullshit. There's got to be something different than like this overwhelming depression and despair and anger and just like struggle. There's got to be something different, you know? And I didn't have to search for a tradition of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism, I was already in Tibetan Buddhism when I became interested in Tibetan Buddhism. I was already in strong relationships with teachers. Like I was someone who was just around Tibetan Buddhist teachers. And I was like, oh, this is fun, whatever. You know? Until I got interested and I was like, oh, fuck. You know, I'm like around these teachers. You know, I'm around these really advanced practitioners. You know, and I was like, oh my God, like this is like incredible. Like I don't have to do anything. I just say, okay, I'm ready. Where do I go and practice? You know, and that was it. And people were like, okay, go into practice here, read this, go to this retreat, here are some teachers. I mean, the red carpet opened up. I was very fortunate, you know. But I was fortunate too because Tantric Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism was really the only practice that I could actually get with. You know, it was the only practice that met my complexity, you know, with its own complexity, you know, and I love that. You know, I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to get free. And I committed myself to the program, right? I'm still committed, right? But it was all, you know, this all just really dangerous, you know. It's because, so what's the word I'm using? Fugitivity. Like, when you're actually really practicing authentically, you are entering into this kind of fugitivity where you're actually beginning to live counterculturally or counter systematically, right? And you're going to be set up for consequences. You know, what have you lost? What have you changed? Now, this is a question for you long-term practitioners. I know some of you have been in this for decades. I know 2 people I know in this space. Well, 3. I don't want to call you out, but 3 of you I know who are here tonight have been doing this for decades, 40, at least 30, 40 years, you know, for some of you. You know, what have you had to give up? What have you had to risk? What have you had to offer? You know, what have been the really challenging experiences with teachers and communities? You know, that's the path. I think one day we'll have a little panel where, you know, long-time practitioners talk about their practice. I think that would be really helpful. You know, what the risks, the dangers, because all these things are just shoving you. They're just like pushing you. It's just like awaken. You know, you're just habitually moving through patterns that are reinforcing the system, but you have to get shoved. This is why there's danger and risk here. You know, you're getting slowly, you know, pushed. I was violently jolted. that was what was happening to me. You know. It seems like people can't see me. Is that correct? So I'm gonna come back to these questions. Let's see. So I want to If you can at least hear me, I think you'll be fine here. This is the first question here. Can you speak on how developing custom? How do you recognize a truly realized teacher? How do you avoid getting deeper into the illusion? Let's see. How do you recognize a truly realized teacher? How do you avoid getting deeper into the illusion? So I'm just thinking about this question here. I'm trying to think of something I haven't said already. Oh, okay. Here we go. This is just my experience. So I choose a teacher based on experiences of opening. Like when I feel opening around a teacher, then that's a sign that that person is my teacher, and I take them as a teacher. I think maybe that's different for different people, but that's my criteria. That opening means that they're speaking to something that I haven't gotten access to, and they're already there. So that's a huge sign for me that there's an attunement to this person. At this point, I'm also led to teachers as well. There's something that I need. I feel myself being guided. This past year, I studied with a tantric teacher, who wasn't really in, any of the traditions that I study in, and was just really quite transformative. It was very short. It was like very, I went to this person with a very set of things that I wanted support around, and guidance. But that's also how it works. I'm guided, deep feeling. But for you, it's like when you're sitting with a teacher, how do you experience them? It's just getting curious about what your experience, mental, emotional, physical experience of a teacher is like. How do you feel? Do you feel open, expansive? Do you feel, I would say, do you feel more joyful? But that's not the best criteria. There's a lot of teachers who make you feel good. But feeling good is not the same thing as getting free, right? So that's also the thing. It's like, yeah, I feel really good around this person. That's not really my criteria. There are a lot of great teachers that are really fun to be around. They're wonderful. These are my friends, blah, blah, blah. But it's more than just feeling good. Is this teacher actually helping me to do work, to get free? What am I digging into? What am I unearthing? What am I processing? Something happened. Oh, anyway. Um, and being with teacher doesn't mean that you necessarily have this really intense personal relationship with this person. That's not it either. Again, it's like, one of my, literally one of my main teachers, one of my really principal teachers is Majaya Sati Bhagavati, who died. Gosh, she died. Was it 15 years ago now? 14 to 15 years ago, before I met her. Right? I didn't meet her in this life, right? But through practice and through having connections to her senior students, I was able to develop this strong connection to Ma, that I can experience in different states. In meditation, I can experience when I'm, in plant medicine ceremonies. I feel extremely close. I can even channel her energy, which is bizarre and strange. Um, and so again, I've never met her in this life, but she is definitely one of my core teachers. you know. So when you get into Tantra, it's really not about the physical. It's not always about the physicality of the teacher. Like the teacher, a realized teacher is manifesting on multiple levels at once. You know, some of you really get that. You know, teacher guides can work with you in dreams and visions. You know, so much of my indigenous practice that I get from Native elders, from Cherokee elders, not all Cherokee, the Native elders who long ago passed on, has always come through visions and dreams. Sometimes through plant medicine, but like just mostly just like sitting, you know, and just opening my mind and just getting downloads. Like that's how it goes, you know. Um, there are many things that I know how to do because that's how I've gotten the transmission. You know, it's through these means. But when I say opening, I guess another word would be relaxing, opening, relaxing. You feel more at ease. When I talk about opening, often I'm talking about my heart chakra, my heart. My heart opens, right? This teacher has triggered this experience of deep heart opening, and I trust that quite a bit. Um, so my friend uh, Pema Chondro, Rinpoche, Pema Chondro is um, well, Pema Chondro is actually indigenous. She's Native American. She's on. I forget. Her people are on the East Coast, I think. Um, but Pema Chondro is she is Tibetan Buddhist teacher, scholar. Her sangha, her organization is out in California, I think, out in the West. Um, Incredible, brilliant. And she's a toku, so she's recognized as a reborn master. But I mentioned her because she has this program that where when you come into the sangha, like you go through this program that's about how to be a student and how to understand the teacher, which I think is really brilliant. Um, Kind of offering, because we're not actually trained how to be students. Quite honestly, a lot of teachers aren't even trained in how to be a teacher. Actually, that was in my traditional training in monastery. We were not taught um, how to be a teacher. Like we literally weren't taught. We were taught how to be really advanced practitioners, but we weren't taught how to teach what we learned. You know, um, and that's a big thing. That's a big thing that's missing in training of lamas. Is like actually how to be a teacher. And that's something that I had to pick up as I went along, and I, have been through other teacher trainings before, so that's been really helpful. But it's important to learn how to be a student. Um, let's see, have I said enough? So this last question, can you speak on how developing concentration or stable mind ties into or supports awareness? Yeah. So concentration practice, well, concentration practice is really intense, by the way. Um, but so concentration practices and mindfulness, shamatha, shene, like just that first level of practice that we traditionally go through is about stabilizing attention and awareness. And when we say stabilizing attention and awareness, it means that like we're learning what We're learning what the mind is and not being distracted by the mind. Right? That's what we're learning in these earlier stages of meditation, right? You're learning how to allow the mind to be without getting distracted by thoughts and emotions. If you don't do that, it's going to be impossible to enter into the next level of meditation, which is insight or vipassana, right? Because in vipassana, we're learning what the mind is. So in the concentration mindfulness is how it's like how the mind operates, and then insight is about understanding what the mind is by understanding what thoughts and emotions and all the material in the mind is. You can't get to insight without stabilization and concentration and mindfulness. So that's why this is important. Um, and this is, you know, we call meditation like this primary technology, like in this system of liberation. This is the primary thing that we're doing is training and meditation. To use matrix language, right? Like you have to learn, you won't be able to see the pattern that's forming the state until the mind stills enough to become aware of it. And you won't be able to become aware of the patterns, the codes, right, until you do this intensive training and allowing the world to be as it is, to allowing phenomenal reality to be as it is. Right now we're just like following everything that arises. Like we hear something, where our mind is there, or we're thinking about what we're going to have for dinner, or when Lama Rod is going to shut up and get into practice. Like all this stuff is happening, so we're distracted. But what's really happening right now? You know, what's really happening in your space? What's happening in your mind? What's happening in your body? Do you even know what's happening? What's going on? Because that's the key, right? It's becoming aware of everything. When you become aware of everything, then you can disrupt your reactivity to everything. When you're disrupting reactivity, then you're disrupting the patterns that we're constantly, cycling through that perpetuate the delusion. You disrupt it by becoming aware, you know. And to add warmth to that awareness, right, which leads that awareness leads to wisdom and clarity, to add warmth, right, to make this a really transformative experience. Then you start adding care. You start caring about others who are also experiencing the same situation you are. You know? So you move from this individuality to a collective mentality. It's like we're trying to get free. We are all stuck. Because when you decenter self like that, then when you decenter self, like your awareness, your perspective actually expands quite a bit. You're able to take in much more, can experience much more, because you're not so bound by the sense of self and contracting around it. You're expanding, right? And when you expand, you're just expanding out into the natural arising mind itself. The mind itself is not contracted. It's this sense of perspective that's contracted. Like my mind isn't small, right? But because I'm still aligned to the sense of self, which seems small, like I am not actually experiencing the totality of mind itself. So compassion and care actually helps me to get there by just centering self, thinking of others. That's the skillful means of compassion in that way. Um, There's so many good questions. This is like why we never practice anymore. Um, mhm. um, Queerness. I just want to briefly touch on from Lauren. Queerness. Is there a connection between queerness and spiritual practice? Yes, queerness is about fluidity, is about transition, is about movement, you know. And queerness, in the sense, as you point out, it's not queerness isn't about sexuality, it's not about gender. You know, queerness is about fluidity. How am I choosing to be fluid in every part of my life? Right? And then we're not being fluid for the hell of being fluid. We're being fluid because it's our natural state. So you're just entering into your natural state. Of course, you may be faking it until you make it, right? Which is how all of us enter into like this kind of expression of queerness. But queerness is like fluidity, blur. Like you have to let. Right now, we think that the world is solid and composite and stable. That's an illusion. And for me, one way for me to get into the heart of this illusion is actually by actually letting go of my own rigidity, moving through my own rigidity and moving to a sense of fluidity, of movement, of questioning, of curiosity. You know, that queerness in this sense is in itself fugitive. Queerness has always been fugitive. Well, queerness is in capitalist, like white supremacist, patriarchal societies, it's been fugitive. Because there are many indigenous cultures where queerness is recognized and named in certain ways, right? Um, yeah, but you can't. So there is, you talk about rituals and ceremonies. Yeah, there are certain ceremonies, like we all can't enter into every possible ceremony that's ever been done, because there are specifications and initiations and beliefs and all kinds of stuff that goes into how we're gaining access to certain realms. But I would say that that fluidity is at the heart of many ceremonies and rituals that gain access. Like you have to be willing to let go of who you think you are. And in queerness, there's a perpetual questioning of who we are that helps us to manifest with the moment. And that's a level of realization that's profound. When you allow yourself, when you get to a point of practice where you're changing with the moment. Like the moment changes, you change. But we are changing with every moment. But I'm talking about a conscious, like you're consciously changing is a new moment, is a new me. I'm different today than I was yesterday, and that's on purpose. And again, we have to also disrupt how we think queerness should be represented or represented and performed. And, we have to let go of that. You know, um, like I think that given the social structure right now, queerness is right now in our present social configuration is always fugitive. So if there's not a sense of danger and risk within your expression of queerness, then is it really queer? Because this queerness is about disruption. It's the disruption of rigidity. Um, do you think it's easier to awaken depending on where you live? It just came from retreat and nature driving, so I can feel the matrix building up more and more around me. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who are just really intensive about practice, live in really natural places, which is really wonderful. Um, It's really, yeah, I think that's wonderful. For me, I don't, the Matrix is the Matrix, right? That's the thing that I love about the movie. It doesn't matter if you're like in this really beautiful hidden forest or if you're in this like really ugly, dirty city, it's still the same thing. And that's Tantra, basically. Beauty, beauty and the opposite of beauty, repulsiveness, I don't know. It's the same thing, you know, you know. But it's also about being skillful. So being in a really settled, natural, quiet place is helpful to maintain my practice, then that's something that we can do. We should do. Absolutely. You know, and that's something I've always thought about too, at the beginning of my practice. And I spent 3 years in like quiet silence. And I was, we were like all thrown out, and was like, okay, now deal with it. And I was like, oh, this is the same. The silence of this retreat is the same as the busyness of New York City, which is what we were close to in my monastery, So you go down to New York City and you'll be like, oh, like this is actually similar to retreat, right? Because it's not about the noise, it's about how I'm relating to the noise. If I can let go and stop being distracted by all the noise and I enter into the heart of reality of essence itself. When you see people, and this is going back to the queerness question, when you see people, um, there are people who are performing queerness but it's really safe. You know, um, Actually, that's a bad example. Let me scrap that and use this example. I want to say that there are people who have the privilege of performing queerness in a way that isn't dangerous because they hold enough social capital to bypass the repercussions of the system. That's what I want to say. That's exactly what I want to say. And that isn't queerness, you know, and that's a way that the system presents queerness. That's a way that the system can present queerness in a way that doesn't disrupt it. It just kind of actually plays along with it. You know, we're going to get to practice, but these questions are actually really good. But this is what I want to say too is that, oh shit, did I just forget? Like it was something really important. It was about queerness. Oh, yeah. I think maybe this goes in line with queerness and finding an authentic teacher. One of the things you have to understand too is that our karma and our merit. So karma, so merit is virtue. So merit or virtue comes from good karma, right? Our virtue has to match the frequency of a teacher that we're wanting to be with. So what does that mean? Um, it means, quite frankly, that some of us don't have the merit to study with really super realized awakened teachers. Basically, that's really what that means, right? And so we're only resonating with teachers who are matching our particular level of merit and karma. So that's another thing that you're having to work out as well. Um, because you want to study with a teacher doesn't mean that teacher is for you, right? For those of us who have read all these commentaries about great masters in the past, particularly in Southeast Asia, a lot of these people weren't, what's the word I'm looking for, celebrated. They weren't, like a lot of these, you talk about tantrikas, right? Tantrikas in medieval Southeast Asia who, talking about fugitive, they were doing everything that you were told not to do. These people weren't like statues and things weren't being named after them. They weren't walking around communities being celebrated because they were so disruptive. They were so threatening to people's comfort and to what people thought it meant to live and to be happy. Like these people were just mirrors that kept throwing back into people's faces how they should be living, and people couldn't stand that, right? It's much like the prophets in the Bible after, I wouldn't say after Jesus passed. I mean, with the apostles, like a lot of the apostles were killed, because they were sharing something that people were just weren't. They were just like it was too much, you know. So I bring that up too because there are teachers who are just too much. They seem like too much, but they're actually doing something really profound. And we have to, some of us have that karmic awareness to actually see that and to tune into that. And some of us don't, and that's fine. You know, you go to India, when Justin and I were last in India before, well, actually during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, we're just like, because Justin loves us, but we just find ourselves in places where it's just like, yeah, where people were doing practices that repulsed. It was repulsive to a lot of people. Like there are a lot of like esoteric practices. Some of them I've done, right? They're just so repulsive, but that's part of the getting free because you have to go to that space. You have to go to those places to really disrupt. That's the fluidity I'm talking about. You have to flow into the places, into these taboos. And that's also the risk and the challenge of this side of liberation work, because you're taking the shadow as material for getting free, and the shadow is full of stuff that we don't have the courage to name for ourselves. You know, but you won't get free until you move there, right? Until you do the things you were told not to do. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily violent things, harmful things. I'm just talking about things that, like, this is not what we do. We don't do this. And you have to question that. Why don't we do it? Right? And of course, when you question that, there are those data that we get. You know, Sometimes you question taboos, and it's like you don't even understand why it's a taboo, and you do all the due diligence, but it's a taboo. You know, um, there are other taboos that are about harming people, hurting people. Like that's something that's not about. When we go into those places, it's not about like actually engaging in those taboos. It's actually undoing all the circumstances that propel us into wanting to do those taboos if we have a desire to do that. Um, and these people that we would see, these people, you know, who have been practicing long lineages of practices for centuries, that go back centuries, millennia, have given up. They've given up family. They've given up material resources. They live day to day. You know, that's a level of commitment to freedom. I'm not saying that's the only one. I'm just saying that's a very profound way, to get free. You know, but another question. I know I'm throwing out all these questions these past weeks, but like, where's your fluidity at? How are you choosing to stay put in the places where you've been put, right? Like why, you know, you were assigned male or female, just as an example, male or female. What's keeping you identified in these locations? You know, I mean, that's just a basic example. But as we go into practice, the thing that I really want to leave you with is that nothing's going to be perfect. Like none of this is going to be perfect. Perfect is just an illusion. So you have to let go of that. You have to let go of what you think a teacher is and what you think studying with a teacher will be like. You have to let all of that go. You know, I had to let it go because I was just getting stuff that that didn't align with what I was reading. You know, but again, I have teachers who work with me on very different levels. You know, um, and guides and and so forth that I'm just working with on so many different levels, and that only comes when you make the choice to be really fluid, you know. But that fluidity doesn't come until there's some stabilization. I'm talking about fluidity in spiritual practice, not fluidity in terms of just like being in the body and being in the world. But I'm talking about the spiritual fluidity where we're letting go of what we think things are and entering into the reality of things. And when we enter into the reality, yeah, it's going to be like really fascinating and really interesting, but you'll have to move through that fascination into the normality of everything. You know, it has to become normal. And it doesn't become normal until you allow everything to be. Allowing everything to be is really just allowing there to, well, training for stability and concentration and mindfulness, and then into awareness, letting everything be. So this is where we're going to start again. We've done this before, but since I've come back to this, we're going to start here with our practice. We'll do like 20 minutes of practice here, right? So at this point, the instruction, the first instruction, is to let everything be. Everything, right? This doesn't mean that you're going to get it. This doesn't mean that like this is just going to happen, but this is where we're starting. This is where we start in practice in general, like the training and letting everything be, the phenomenal world, everything that's happening around you, mind, thoughts and emotions, body, sensation, breath. So what we're doing is, basically snow again and rain and all these practices and for foundations, but just beginning to notice everything that's happening, but not getting attached to it. So noticing everything, and you can name it. Noticing, naming, and just letting everything go. Just letting everything go. But this is a training. If you're at the beginning of this practice, if you're just starting out practice, this may be a multi-year project. you know, learning how to see and to name things happening out in the world, happening inside of us, and naming it without getting rolled up in it, getting attached to it. What is that for you? What is that experience? Because at that point, when you start letting the world be, that's when you start finding the cracks in the phenomenal world. These cracks of the coding, right? And one of the ways the cracks appear is when you begin to, begin to say, oh, like, what makes this object? If you everyone's sitting in front of a computer, some type of technology. You look at that technology, you can say, like, what is this? Like, how am I creating this sense of like a computer or something? You know, slowly you begin to see that this manifestation of the computer is the same manifestation of a thought. It's the same, a thought and a computer are the same thing. The nature of both of these things are identical. Emptiness, space, energy. That's when the code begins to unravel. And you're like, oh, like the nature of everything is the same. I am the same nature as my computer. My computer is the same nature as my thought. This thought is the same nature, as this water that I'm holding, which I need to drink. In the spirit of the matrix, I can ask myself, am I really drinking this? Am I drinking the water, or is the water drinking me? It doesn't matter. Does it actually matter? Because it's all the expression of this fundamental emptiness, space, and energy. When you get to that level of practice, that's where the intensity, the severity of the state begins to dissipate. It doesn't go away 100%, but the intensity lessens. And that's where the capacity to experience joy can arise within a world that's in a perpetual struggle. And this may be more of a reflection for some of us, and some of you are actually having an experience where you're actually moving into the nature of things, and that's wonderful. All of it's wonderful. Your experience. What is the experience of all this phenomena that you're naming and seeing? What is the experience? The experience is, crossing the line. You know, is crossing the line into like these really potent forms of fugitivity because the system doesn't want us to experience because experiencing is the door out, right? To feel, to get curious, right? To notice all this accompanying sensation with um, in this experience of whatever it is that you're experiencing. And for me, just to disclose, like my experience is just resting in the experience of everything. It's just like a thought. What's the experience of this thought that I'm having, of the sensation that's arising? The experience of all phenomena, actually, just sitting in it. Not being distracted by everything or anything. It doesn't matter if you're distracted by a whole bunch of things or if you're distracted by one thing, it's still distraction. So at this point, we've entered into awareness. So moving from, we actually didn't do concentration practice, we did mindfulness, but moving into, out of mindfulness, moving out of calm abiding meditation, which is what we've been doing, entering into more of an awareness, an open awareness practice. We haven't done insight yet, quite yet, but actually we are doing insight a little bit. But I'm being, I'm not being so heavy-handed with insight right now. But open awareness is like letting everything arise, not attaching to anything in particular, so letting everything be there. Of course, when I say experience, I'm actually giving you a key instruction for insight practice. So we are doing insight actually. But I want us to do this combination of awareness and insight where we're experiencing everything, but also allowing everything just to move through our experience. And again, nothing is supposed to disappear. This isn't a disappearing act here. This is an allowing, letting everything be in its place, and not feeling as if I have to react to everything. Just letting everything be in its place, and just noticing that and letting it be. You may have a thought of anger, or resentment, or something that you're shameful of. That's fine, but just let it be there, and just let it be. Of course, that's the labor, to let something that feels unpleasurable have its space in our experience. That's really tough, but that's the practice. To give it space, to give it room. And when you do that, then you're being asked to experience, you're asked to feel the discomfort. So phenomena, all phenomena, mind, body, everything that we perceive as being outside of us, everything. So when I say phenomena, I mean everything, everything. So everything becomes like this ocean. And it's just this ocean that we're kind of staring out over. And of course, we've done this meditation before, but there's this ocean that we're just allowing to move, to do what it does as a this body of water, just allowing it to be. You still feel the discomfort, but it's not the only thing that's happening. So I don't have to in this practice in this moment, I don't feel compelled to contract around one experience, but to allow there to be an expansion of my awareness to hold everything. So this is how we begin. This is the basic training to start disrupting the realness of the state of whatever language, the matrix, the carceral state, samsara, right, delusion. You have to stop reacting to everything and sit within spaces of just allowing things to be there, and then learning how to transition into responsiveness. Again, this is the queerness here coming up. I am choosing to be fluid, to change, to evolve, to grow, to meet the moment, to let go of who I think I am. This is the space for me where I've been able to work with identities, right, and intersectionality, to say that, yeah, I am, but I'm also not. And both of those statements are true. And to just experience that. And I promise one more matrix reference. This is the loading program stage if you want to go there. Like this is the loading program. Like this is the space where we go to before we enter into the totality of the matrix of the world, right? This is where the world comes from, right? It's this basic fundamental experience. Now, if you're struggling with this particular practice, that's fine. Just remember these instructions. Of course, you can come back to the video anytime. I want you just to reflect on these basic instructions I'm offering just through your day, right? Letting things be, right? Noticing my reactivity, relaxing that reactivity. Why am I always overreacting to everything? Noticing how overreactivity continues to create a reality that I buy into. And if I can stop reacting, I can get into the space where I'm able to begin to experience the fundamental nature of everything, which is just one thing. Like the fundamental nature is just this oneness. And this is where the deity arises. Like in this stage, this is where we call the deity forms in this space. I want to offer the mantra just for a couple of minutes here. As we go into the mantra, which is medicine Buddhist mantra, Te Ataum Bekenze Maha Bekenze Lasa Sumungate Soha. So in this space, allowing the mantra to take form. So allowing the mantra to take form, not dictating, not directing the form, but allowing the form to take shape. Right? Allowing the form to take shape. This is part of this queerness, this fluidity, where we're actually just allowing things to happen. Not directing, but allowing. Knowing that everything is happening within the space of our own mind, which was happening within our own minds, period. But allowing it to happen and knowing that ultimately you have agency here. Even if that agency is just letting it go and not reacting. There's still agency. And you can chant along and just sit and listen, but just allowing whatever happens to happen. But staying within this open awareness. Okay. So we begin. O te ataum bekenze maha bekenze rasa sumungate soa. 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 Te ataum Begenze, ma begenze, raza sumungate soa. Deata begenze, begenze, ma begenze, raza sumungate soa. Deata begenze, begenze, ma begenze, raza sumungate soa. So let's gently, slowly start coming back into the moment. Maybe connecting to the weight of your body, making contact with the seats or your feet on the floor or some maybe neutral part of your body. Maybe the breath that's accessible for you, maybe sound, a smell, just connecting to something, some phenomena that's grounding for us. Coming back into this moment. Okay. Just doing some, simple movements to awaken body, some stretching, whatever it may be. And then we'll just go right into our recitation of Shantadeva's prayer. Was we're going to recite this 3 times. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings into the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach to the ends of space. And finally, may I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. just like space and the great elements such as earth. May I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. All right. Thank you all so much for your practice. It's really not supposed to be 2 hours of practice. In my mind, it's supposed to be an hour. But anyway, thank you for holding on. There's so much to say these days. This is why I'm going to get these lectures going as soon as possible, maybe February, because there's so much information that's coming out right now that we need to be working with. So that's that. So thank you all so much. And I don't know if there's anything I need to announce. But yeah, just check Bumi's Parsha calendar and get connected to our groups and what have you. And I'll be introducing some stuff soon as well, some extra stuff for us to get involved with. All right, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you everyone for supporting the space, for Karen, for supporting our tech hosting. So the questions again I want to leave you with is, just about what do you need from a teacher? What are you wanting? And what's, you know, I'll say this has been my experience. The more realized and known a teacher is, the harder it is to have a real personal relationship with them. So that's a consideration. So you're looking for a personal relationship. That's something that you're going to have to take into account as well. So, anywho, please everyone rest. If you're in Australia, then you're just kind of getting up. And then various parts of the evening, depending on where we are in the world. Thank you all so very much, and we'll be back next Monday. All right. Thank you.